In your Brave New World Revisited, which was published about 2 years ago, you did claim that much of what you forecast had come true. I mean, for example, the use of drugs and this instance of people having their thoughts directed while they're asleep through music being played or messages being played through their pillows and so on. I mean, in which societies do you think that most of what you forecast has mostly come true? I mean, is it in America, Britain, Russia, China?
Well, it seems to me this is not so much, you can't say that it's a question of national peculiarities or even entirely of political peculiarities. I mean, I think when the technological and applied scientific means are developed, they just tend to be used. I mean, I think one can say that the whole history of recent times in relation to science and technology shows that if you plant the seed of applied science or technology, it proceeds to grow, and it grows according to the laws of its own being. And the laws of its being are not necessarily the same as the laws of our being. I mean, hence this sense which so many people have, and which I think one sees in so many societies, this sense that man is being subjected to his own inventions, that he is now the victim of his own technology and the victim of his own applied science, instead of being in control of it.
How could he be in control of it?
Well, this is the problem. I mean, I think that this is perhaps one of the major problems of our time. How do we make use of this thing? I mean, after all, this was stated in the Gospel. Man, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. And in the same way, technology was made for man, and not man for technology. But unfortunately, the development of recent social and scientific history has created a world in which man seems to be made for technology rather than the other way round. And we have to start thinking about this problem very seriously and seeing how we can re-establish control over our own inventions.
But would you say then that America or Britain was as liable to suffer from the arts of mass persuasion or brainwashing, say, as dictatorial societies?
Well, at the moment, fortunately, we have in both these countries a considerable constitutional tradition which puts a brake on these kind of activities. I mean, for example, one of the ablest writers, it seems to me, on sociological problems is the French writer Professor Ellul, who views the difference between the the Russian totalitarian and the Western civilizations as being essentially a difference in the readiness to make use of technology immediately and to the limit. I mean, Engels from the first asserted that socialism would come through the use of technology to the limit. And the Russian regime has always been prepared to follow out the logic of technology, whereas in the West we still remember John Stuart Mill, James Mill, Jefferson and so on. We still remember vaguely the precepts of Christianity, and we are a little reluctant to embark upon technology, to allow technology to take over. In the long run we generally succumb. I mean, I'm reminded in this context of the line in Byron's Don Juan about this lady who, vowing she would ne'er consent, consented. And in the long run we generally do consent. I mean, but in the short run we sort of haggle about it, and we are reluctant to, but we tend to be pushed by the advancing technology in a certain direction which I don't find desirable. And I do think we have to start thinking very intensively about this problem and seeing how we can get control again of our invention. I mean, this is the kind of Frankenstein monster problem.
Suppose that this rather frightful prospect comes about. I mean, are people going to be happy under this kind of regime?
Well, I think you could. I mean, this was one of the sort of what I may call the messages of Brave New World, that it is possible to make people contented with their servitude. I think this can be done. I think it has been done in the past, but then I think it could be done even more effectively now, because you can provide them with bread and circuses, and you can provide them with endless amounts of distractions and propaganda.
This all raises, I think, so it does to me anyway, this question of how much one really does value freedom, or really how free one feels oneself to be. I mean, someone like myself, say, was grown up since the war. I mean, do you believe that I am less free than someone who was brought up in the 20s or in the 80s of the last century or in the 18th century?
Well, it depends entirely who you were in the 80s of the last century or the 18th century. I mean, if you were a country gentleman with an income, you were remarkably free, but if you were a peasant on his estate, you were remarkably unfree. I mean, it seems to me maybe the word freedom perhaps is too vague a term in this sort of context. I think what we have to ask is what sort of a social pattern and what sort of a political regime is best calculated to help the individuals within the society to realize the maximum extent of their desirable potentialities. I mean, it's quite obvious that most of us are functioning at about 10% of capacity, and that wouldn't it be nice if we could function at 20% instead of at 10%? And
do you have any clear idea of how this could be done? What kind of society it would be?
Well, I have ideas. I don't know whether they're valid or not. As a matter of fact, I've just finished a kind of utopian fantasy, which is the opposite of Brave New World, which is about a society in which a serious effort is made to help its members to realize their desirable potentialities. And I've gone into, I mean, this is an attempt to write what may be called a practical utopia. Nothing is easier, of course, than to enunciate ideals and to say, well, wouldn't it be nice if everybody were good and kind and loving, etc., etc. Of course it would be very nice, but the point is, how do you implement these ideals? How do you fulfill your good social and psychological intentions? And when you come down to this problem, you see it's a very complex problem of organizing family life, organizing education, organizing sexual life, organizing social and economic life. I mean, there are endless factors involved in this, and to try to work out what all these factors should be is I must say, I found a very interesting job. As far as I was concerned, I don't know whether anybody else will find it interesting.
Okay. Quite the interview with Aldous Huxley in 1961. So this is a discussion that's preconditioning. You can see that's from BBC, but there were similar interviews with Huxley in 61 at Berkeley where he's saying the same thing. So he's doing this tour and he's talking about the same stuff. So what is he mentioning? The book Island, which is the other sort of dystopian answer to A Brave New World. He talks about practical utopia. So he's connecting practicalism, pragmatism, ends and means discussions. So we're going to introduce everybody to the social contract theory, because that's what all of these guys are, is social contract theorists. So interesting that the interviewer right away says forecast when talking about Huxley's predictions. This is this great misunderstanding that the world has of Huxley. He's not a prognosticator. He's largely like Brandeis, sort of the architect of all of this. And so the use of drugs, music, and messages played through their pillows. He mentions totalitarianism. And so whenever you hear the word totalitarianism, that is a direct reference to fascism. Fascism, totalitarianism, the exact same thing. He mentions Engels. So this is the Communist Manifesto. This is the guy that co-wrote it with Marx. And so he's talking about scientific socialism. This is exactly how this has unfolded over the 20th century. It's the socialists that are looking at advancement of technology and scientific research to sort of gain the upper hand on society. So it's kind of it was for me when I understood that I've always thought that the socialists were behind the times for whatever reason, but no, they're on the cutting edge. So welcome to the history of propaganda, where we predict the future by telling the past. So on the last show about Disneyland, couple omissions that I missed there. First of all, the Lincoln animatronics, we have to show that, but that was an amazing display of animatronics, wasn't it? And this circular, all these references to the 20th century industrial revolution shows the evolution of the family through the 20th century. I thought it was quite amazing. And the logo, the Century of Progress inside of a gear. Okay, rat race. He mentions rat race in there. I find it amazing. So what I wanted to do, though, was link Disney to this Changing Images of Man study a little bit better. So I'm just going to go to it and start, because this will be a great introduction into what we're going to talk about today, how Aldous Huxley hijacked Hollywood. And so this is a 3-part series. I wrote 3 different articles on it. And so we're going to probably do this in 2 parts because it's a lot. So the Changing Images of Man study. Is here. Okay, so you should be seeing the Changing Images of Man book. Yes, you are. So you can see the authors. It's kind of, for those that are uninitiated, a little jarring to see Joseph Campbell, the author of The Hero's Journey, but this is really how Hollywood is based. All of our movies are based off of Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. Okay, so Willis Harman is going to be a key guy that we're going to show a little bit later. And all of this is coming out of SRI, as I've said. This is in 1982. There was a Changing Images of Man first sort of edition in the 70s as well. So page 52, we'll go back to, I want to show you the cover if we can. Not sure if I've done this with you guys, but this is important to see. So this is Changing Images of Man. Prepared by the Center for the Study of Social Policy, SRI International, O.W. Markley and Willis W. Harman. It's going to kind of be this star of the show today. And that actually might be his face now that I look at that, but I'm sure we'll know that unless it's described in here. But System Science and World Order Library, Explorations of World Order. So these aren't something you're going to find on Chapter's bookshelf. These are distributed among themselves. See the publisher here? Robert Maxwell. And I believe that is the Robert Maxwell. And we can see a stamp from the New College of California. So we're progressive for sure. Okay, we see some names there along the left of those others that are involved. And this book mentions Huxley several times. Really, Huxley's kind of the inspiration for all of this, as you're going to see, including MKUltra. Okay, so we'll go back to page 53, and we want to connect this back to Disneyland and sort of a bridge to today's episode, because maybe I'll go here first. Can I just do that? Yes. Beautiful. Okay, so the thing is in the way, so I'm going to move that. So this is an article that I did on our old site. I just threw it in here. There's not really, it's not finished or anything, but it's got some condensed information here rather than trying to find it in the book. So let's see if I can find what I'm looking for. Okay, so this is the image here that is in the book that describes the levels of description useful in analyzing social change. So you can see that our basic values and perceptions are here at the bottom. And then those steer our motivations. And our motivations then steer our behavior. And our collective behavior then is applied to the general state of the society. So as long as our basic values and perceptions are wholesome, healthy, then the state of our society should be. But the moment that our basic values and perceptions start changing our motivations, maybe into more degenerative behavior, starts to decrease the health of the society in which you live. This is no-brainer, right? So that's an image out of there. And this is how deep they go. I said to somebody that they've spent trillions, maybe gazillions, if you add it all up over the 20th century, on social control and trying to figure out what makes us tick. And they certainly have. And so that's what I'm trying to show you, is I'm trying to expose all of this is the actual way that they've taken control of our society. So our beliefs, values, and perceptions originate from our culture. In fact, they are a direct result of the above mentioned 7 functions of society here. And this is where it connects to Disneyland, because one of the aspects that they try to infiltrate into our society is the mythical, mystical, and magical. So you can see here, they include these 7 functions, include mystical, cosmological, sociological, pedagogical, or psychological, editorial, political, and magical. But they also include in the book, if you were to read it, also the mystical and magical functions, thanks to Joseph Campbell's influence. So these 7 functions include everything in our society, all of our institutions, whether they're public, private, and how they are going to be used to manipulate and control and engineer society. Okay. I invite you to go and look at that book. It's on the Internet Archive right now. And then those 7 functions affect directly these 4 levels that we've discussed earlier: the state of society, behavior, motivations, and basic values. Okay, so that's what when we see Disneyland, that's what it is. It's they're applying science that they've figured out in the mythical, mystical, and magical realm. So that's really what Disneyland is, right? It's all highly esoteric, just metaphysical, mystical, magical. So that's how it connects to this SRI that was helping to establish Disneyland. This is why they're involved in all of this. Okay, and then let's go back to the book. This page here, we just want to talk quickly about, is this the right page? Yes. Possibly obsolescent premises that typify the recent industrial era. So they're moving beyond that, trying to change the image into sort of a post-industrial world. And that's really officially now where we are at with this latest technate stuff. So number 1, that progress is synonymous with growth of GNP. So they're saying that this possibly could be an obsolete way to look at things, that the individual should be free to make his own choice of the good. That might be on the way out. That people are essentially separate, so that little intrinsic responsibility is felt for the effect of present actions on remote individuals or future generations. That humankind is separate from nature. The technological imperative that any technology that can be developed and any knowledge that can be applied should be. That man is rational. So these are thoughts of the 20th century that steered the New World Order. You can see that this is all about a larger thought process, philosophical, intellectual ground, like a framework to the New World Order. This is the philosophical foundations to the entire movement. So lots of things we can see physically happening, but this is the philosophies that steer it. Okay. So then the animatronic Lincoln, real quick, if I can find it. I wanted to show you this picture of animatronic Lincoln because this is really the melding of man and machine, and it's being shown to people at Disneyland. I wonder if I can now. Hmm. Okay, give me a moment. I'm going to get ourselves this Lincoln animatronic because it's worth it. And then we'll move on. Okay. So I find it interesting that Lincoln is the guy, right? Because all of this goes back to Lincoln. Once you get in deep into the Brandeis progressive era, technocrats, they're all, you look in Trump's Oval Office right now, it's all about Lincoln. And so the first animatronic is Lincoln. And so that's what the carousel of progress is. It's animatronics, all of those characters, right? So I thought that was interesting. And then here's the control, if I can get it. I don't know how to. Nope. One moment. Just want to show you how they control them because that's interesting too. So there must be a bunch of people behind the scenes moving these animatronic figures. These control mechanisms. Should be just, I mean, these two pictures are next to each other in the folder. I should be able to just flip to them, but it doesn't let me do that. Oh, look at that. Interesting, right? Animation console. So those are a couple things from the last show that I didn't get in there. And so now we're going to move on to how Huxley hijacked Hollywood. Oh, one more piece of paperwork for a friend on Facebook. I just want to show this. And I wonder if I can. Let's see. Better time than right now to see if we can. Yes. So if you guys have ever seen the brain, you know what I'm showing you here. But this is a tool that we should, somebody needs to start filling in. I just haven't had time. Can you guys see that right? Kind of. So you can see this is how we do it. You can then connect because his father was a House of Rothschild. We can start making these connections in an incredibly visual way and start filling in all the information so that, this would be very helpful for people to look at. There's no doubt if we could have it finished. And you can see that down here on the side, you can start adding links to wiki pages or, primary source material for each one of those. So that's the brain. If anybody wants to help out, they can definitely purchase one of those and start filling in all the blanks. I can help you. Maybe we'll sell it to Dwayne's brain. Okay, so now we're going to get on to social contract theory. And so if anybody's ever read Plato's Republic, that's a social contract theory book, right? It's they take into consideration all the aspects of society and the best way that they could possibly handle them. And yes, I got the little triangle so I can actually flip through there, but that's what this is. It is Aldous Huxley's inquiry into the nature of ideals and into the methods employed for the realization. So this is all about social control. And here again, ends and means is something important for everybody to understand. Is that means pragmatism, ends and means, right? The ends are going to justify the means. So when we get deep into some of this stuff and the experimental psychology and these psychological operations that go on that are the 60s counterculture, you got to understand that those are the means to an ends. And so when they put up the ends as this beautiful utopia, that means that everything that they do to get there is justified. And this is pragmatic, because pragmatism says as long as it works, it is therefore true. So this is William James, experimental psychology. This is where pragmatism comes from. And Huxley, when he says practical, this is really what he's invoking. So this pattern here is important to understand. Ends and means, ways and means, right? The methods, modus operandi, the methods of the New World Order justify the ends, which is a beautiful forever utopia of 1,000 years. Okay, so there's a few quotes that I want to pull out of here quick, because we're going to start to align all of the things that he says. So we're taking this stuff right out of the books, right? We're going right through these books. And so I've got to go to 15. So desired goals, ends. This is what he said in that interview. What are the goals? We hear that several times through the MKUltra reunion video that we're going to go through as quick as possible. So there is, as we have seen, a great variety of fanatically entertained opinions regarding the best way of reaching the desired goal, which is a healthy, great society. We should be well advised to consider them all. To exalt any single one of them into an orthodoxy is to commit the fault of oversimplification. In these pages, I shall consider some of the means which must be employed and employed simultaneously if we are to realize the end which the prophets and the philosophers have proposed for humanity, a free and just society fit for non-attached men and women to be members of, and such at the same time as only non-attached men and women could organize. So this is straight out of Brave New World. Everybody belongs to everybody. So that's remedy. The solutions that the BBC interviewer asked Huxley about, and Huxley was pretty vague about and said it was pretty complex. He's saying it here. That we're going to go into all of those 7 aspects of society, the pedagogical, the sociological, all of those things that we just discussed in the Changing Images of Man study, and then we're going to do it simultaneously throughout them. This is the work that he did with his brother, Julian. Okay. So 30. So 30. And so we're talking about social contract theory. And he says, so let us sum up and draw our conclusions as to this just society that they're going to have. First, then we see that unchanging human nature is not unchanging, but can be, and very frequently has been, profoundly changed. Second, we see that many, perhaps most, of the observed associations of behavior patterns in human societies can be disassociated and their elements reassociated in other ways. Third, we see that large-scale manipulations of the social structure can bring about certain changes in human nature, but that these changes are rarely fundamental. They do not abolish evil. They merely deflect it into other channels. But if the ends we desire are to be achieved, there must be more than a mere deflection of evil. There must be suppression at the source in the individual will. So they are looking at the individual will as evil to their plan, just like they would look at the US Constitution as an obstacle. Okay. 34. Just going to give you some quick ones out of this. Like a lot of people talk about Brave New World, but go read Ends and Means, man. He puts it into practical terms where they can actually start doing it. And this is, I'm not sure which year this is printed. We'll have to check. But it's certainly after A Brave New World, 1930. So he says here that social reform with violence doesn't work. Somewhere here. And I usually underline these. Yeah, so he's dispelling the use of violence, right? This is why 1984 and A Brave New World are kind of opposite, in that Aldous Huxley doesn't really suggest violence as a way to control society. He's using breads and circuses and distraction. So he even mentions the Jacobins here, and we're starting to see that they're involved. So very little violence will be needed to enforce them. Large-scale reforms. This is progressivism. Large-scale reforms is the progressive era. No matter what and where in the 20th century it did it. Okay, so it's 34, 39. All fascist planning has one ultimate aim: to make the national society more efficient as a war machine. He's advocating Machiavellian principles. So all fascist planning has one ultimate aim: to make the national society more efficient as a war machine. Right there. Industry, commerce, and finance are controlled for this purpose. The manufacture of substitutes is encouraged in order that the country may be self-sufficient in times of war. So preparedness, efficiency. He's mentioning fascism just like he mentioned totalitarianism in the beginning. Large-scale planning by democratic powers have been dictated by the desire to achieve military efficiency. Right here. So this coordination between the British Empire towards self-sufficient economic sustainability through military efficiency. So I invite you to go look at that. That'll be on Internet Archives too. So military efficiency, fascism, ways and means we've discussed, and how that is related to practical solutions, or the practical application of these ideas, and how that is associated directly with pragmatism. They are all the same thing. And pragmatism comes from William James, who is also known as the first American experimental psychologist at the same time as Wilhelm Wundt. More on him in a bit. Oh, there's one more. Hang on. It says 69 here. There was something maybe that might be important. That looked underlined or omitted. So this one here: political road to a better society is decentralized. Centralized military prepared state ceases to be democratic. So he's making some interesting conclusions, same as we are. Highly militarized, centralized government is not the answer. No society which is preparing for war can afford to be anything but highly centralized. This is why they go after a highly centralized government, all of them, to a man, in every book. Remember? So, yep, that's actually 69 right there. We're going to move on, and we're going to get into how Huxley hijacked Hollywood. And we're going to start telling that story, and then we're going to get to the MKUltra reunion tape in that story, I believe. And we're going to break away again. And we're going to get into some amazing admissions from Timothy Leary and some of the MKUltra doctors that he was associated with. Okay. I hope that helps you guys understand a few things right away. This is important to understand. Ends and means, ways and means, and the ends. Walter Lippmann writes a social contract theory book called The Good Society or The Great Society. Graham Wallace writes a book of the same name, The Great Society, dedicates it to Walter Lippmann. When you look at B.F. Skinner, some of the guys on the shelf here, like Bertrand Russell, they're all social contract theorists. When you see economists, they're largely, they're making commentary on the best ways to have society planned, organized. So I am trying to get somewhere here. So this first story I'm going to go through is called The Exiliterator, and I'm pretty sure many of you have read it already. Or have watched some of my work somewhere on this, either with Jesse Howe or Chris Matthew. Shout out to those guys. Okay, what's going on here? How come I can't? This little picture of me is in the way often. Okay, so Exiliterator. We see in the clouds Marx, Hegel, and Freud as Huxley's driving the jalopy of progress, socialism, social engineering, totalitarianism down Pacific Palisades. They are exuding the Marxist, Hegelian, and Freudian philosophies. It's like a melding of them all. Using dialectics, critical theory, and destruction of the individual, really, which is what Freud is. Okay, a little license plate that says Huxley. So in here, these are some of the characters you're going to get to know today. Leon Feuchtwanger. He's the owner of a political salon, Villa Aurora. Can't remember this guy's name right now, ironically enough, because he's probably the most famous. Bertolt Brecht. Here is Thomas Mann. Schoenfeld. No. He's 12 tonal music. So when you hear like the music of Tom and Jerry, just crash bang, with no real sense, this is him. Schoenberg. Here's Max Horkheimer and his best buddy right here, Theodore Adorno. These guys are both working at the Princeton Radio Research Project when the War of the Worlds broadcast happened. Right after that, they fucked off to California to hang out with Aldous Huxley and these guys discussing social contract theory at political salons. Political salon comes from the French Revolution. So political salon, the House of Truth in New York, and then the several here in Los Angeles that we're going to get into are all connected back to Marxist Prussian geography. So, without any further ado, from New York to the garden paradise of Los Angeles, they came. Brought over as part of the Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars, it's the official name. From 1933 to 45, they were all fleeing Hitler. Many of the Frankfurt School exiles landed in New York after first searching for refuge in Switzerland and Paris, the Frankfurt School members representing a small handful, whereas the other hundreds of emigres escaping the rise of German fascism in the search of a home or safety, refuge. So having been displaced from their influential positions within post-World War I Weimar culture, they were assisted in their escape by, quote, a small group of academics and philanthropists in New York City, end quote, who, quote, contacted Stephen Duggan, who is the apostle of internationalism. Look him up, get to know him. This is internationalism and progress are hiding communism, socialism, and everything else. So the director of the Institute of International Education to discuss the possibility of creating an organization to assist German scholars fleeing to the United States. So it's Stephen Duggan's idea. Felix Warburg and Alan Gregg, who is the head of the Rockefeller, which I say at the end of this paragraph, served as advisors to the organizers and helped gain support for other refugee and philanthropic organizations. That's all one big quote. So the entire idea credited to inquiry architect Alvin Saunders Johnson, co-founder of the New School for Social Research. Felix Warburg, widely known as the father of the Fed, and Gregg, a lifetime Rockefeller man. So Alvin Saunders Johnson, also there at the creation of the New Republic, is probably hanging out at the House of Truth. He is the co-founder of the New School for Social Research. So this actually happens 20 years before this influx of emigres into Los Angeles, because the New School for Social Research is founded in 1919. Most people don't know that. They think that it just starts in the 30s when everybody starts fleeing from Hitler, but they'd already done it once before because there was already a war against Germany. Okay, this is reasons to bring all the intellectual technology over, just like Operation Paperclip. This is exactly like Operation Paperclip, just in another aspect. Those 7 functions of society, just another function. This is into the intellectual. So Alfred E. Cohen, Bernard Flexner, Fred Stein, and Stephen Duggan formed the nucleus of the organization, and this guy with his dogs, Hiram Howell, the lead funder with Rockefeller matching donations. Now, I've got a video of them having a little house party, and I would say that this is a political salon here too, and they're shooting arrows and playing croquet, and the head of Rockefeller is there hanging out with all of these escaped Marxists. That's what these guys are. That's why they had to leave. So Livingston Farrand, the original chairman before Duggan, Fred Stein, the treasurer, Cohn, the assistant treasurer, Edward R. Morrow. That name should pop off the page. Assistant secretary until 1935. Also part of the General Committee was American Roundtable member Frank Adelet, the Institute for Advanced Studies. I think where Einstein comes from. Okay, president of Carnegie Institute of Technology, Guggenheim Foundation. They're all represented here. 303 German scholars funded entirely by Rockefeller. You can find that information on their own website. And many were also assisted in their emigration by the Julian Rosenwald Fund. And for those following along who now recognize Norbert Wiener, it was him of all people who held considerable influence over which displaced foreign scholars were to be aided by the committee. And so you can see our future perfect 2-part series, but you can't. I haven't done that yet. We could go through that soon, perhaps. So Alvin Saunders, here's this gentleman with the pipe. About as pretentious looking as we possibly could ever be. Inquiry architect. He's there at the founding of U.S. foreign policy, the New School for Social Research. He's hanging out with Columbia radicals, Charles Beard, James Harvey Robinson, James T. Shotwell mentioned on the last show. Now, this is one of the best artifacts that I think I've ever found. This is at the Waldorf Astoria in the day when these people were all brought over, 303 and their families went to the Waldorf Astoria. This is the Emergency Committee in Aid of Displaced Foreign Scholars at the long table to the right. This long table to the right, guess who we find? This picture was about 30 little pieces that I had to put together to at least be able to get this close. That's Isaiah Bowman. This is Alvin Saunders Johnson, Hamilton Fish Armstrong, of whom his wife, Walter Lippmann, stole, and Felix Frankfurter. So we got Felix Frankfurter sitting here. He's the lieutenant of Brandeis, sitting right beside the real-life Indiana Jones, Isaiah Bowman. And it's Bowman, actually, that is given the responsibility by FDR to find a homeland for the Jew. And he is the head of the inquiry. So the founding of the Council on Foreign Relations, him and Walter Lippmann are the two major keys. And I would say that all of those men, except for Alvin Saunders Johnson, are Jewish, and they're reform. They're not religious, yet they will be involved with reform Judaism. Lippmann's family went to the Temple Emmanuel, Lexington Avenue in New York. So they're all they're all Reform Judaists. And so when you look up that Reform Judaism on a wiki page, it says also known as Progressive Judaism. Okay. So here's Thomas Mann and his brother. Here, two very important players in the persuasion, the manufacture of consent of the American people to rise up against Hitler. So some of the same propaganda techniques, actually exactly the same propaganda techniques that they were using in 1916-17, they're using here again. World War I and World War II, just really one war with an intermission called an interwar period. Okay, so the Frankfurt School, otherwise known officially as the Institute for Social Research. This is the disease that came over and infiltrated all of our American universities. This is why they are all today, 100 years later, social research universities, nearly all of them. It was affiliated directly with the University of Frankfurt and based its philosophy on the German idealist thinking of Marx, Hegel, and Freud, represented through a synthesis also to include the contributions of Immanuel Kant, Max Weber, George Simmel, and George Lukács. Of course, there's several others there involved. So the Frankfurt School, an early influential think tank of the Weimar Republic. This is where we're largely living in Weimar 2.0 right now. The total degeneration of our society, debasement of our values and traditions. We talked about those earlier, and this is why I talked about them right away, because we're going to be referencing them back the entire time. These guys are in Hollywood, can't speak English. They're critical theorists. These are the founders of critical theory. Anything American, anything Western, we must be critical of. And we can see that they've really, over 100 years, done a lot to chip away. And more than chip away, they've basically taken the, where we're at right now, these guys have done a good job in removing, the rugged individual. Totally have deleted the definition of classic liberalism. And we can see just how debased our society has become. And these are the tip of the spear. When you chase this all back to source, these are the guys you find. So Horkheimer, the Frankfurt School's president, eventually making a deal with an all too willing to accommodate president of Columbia, Abbott Lawrence Lowell, in bringing Marxist thought to one of the most prestigious Ivy League universities in America. Say it with me, everybody. Prestige means to trick or fool. So they helped to continue the legacy of social and applied science. Research think tank started at the beginning of the 20th century and would be forever known as the University in Exile. Okay, so social science and applied science. Social science is, and then applying it is this feedback loop that Norbert Wiener invented. So you gather all this information from researching humans, and then you take that, collate it, figure out what you want to do, and then apply it back into society. That is the feedback loop. And it was brought into Columbia University. And this is really the source of the huge controversy that happened there, was the introduction of these guys. Because there are people in the day that knew that this was crazy. Just like they knew that confirming the first Jewish U.S. Supreme Court justice was a bad idea. It's the longest contended confirmation of any U.S. Supreme Court justice was Louis Brandeis's, until Felix Frankfurter came along, his protege. They fought even harder against him. But largely because the general masses have no idea what's going on, they were able to get him in there. And look at the changes he has made. And so today, 100 years later, people still don't understand this trick of progress. So Columbia is serving as a fitting landing place in that it already housed the new school for social research invented out of thin air over a decade earlier by Charles Beard, James Harvey Robinson, and Alvin Saunders Johnson. Johnson just so happens to be an early inquiry architect and New Republic assistant editor. He was there at the founding moments. They are two of James T. Shotwell's most favorite fellow faculty members at Columbia. Highly progressive. Theodore Adorno, his opinion of America can be summed up in one picture. He is really the founder of critical theory. Bring up America, that's what he's going to do. Bring up the West and our traditions and our values, he's going to say they suck. Get rid of them, in fact. And, rumor has it that he's involved in the music industry too, and hopefully the deeper I go into that pop music research vein, I'm hoping that somewhere along the way that we run into Theodore Adorno, the inventor of critical theory. Here's Charles Beard, author of The New History. Super famous, well-known, progressive, revolutionary, really. So he, Alvin Saunders Johnson, and Robinson, James Harvey Robinson, gathered together a group of friends and fellow scholars, all of whom were associated with the New Republic, where Johnson was working. Johnson began taking part along with Beard, Robinson, and others in weekly sessions planning for a new school, the University in Exile, and the Garden of Eden. Alvin Johnson and his rescue efforts for European Jews and intellectuals, Gerald Steinacher, Brian Barmettler, University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Critical theory on Morningside Heights, just showing you that there's provenance and literature out there in the intellectual scholarly circle that fully explains everything that I'm telling you here. It's not conspiracy theory at all. This is just, again, documented historical fact. Eventually, the University in Exile would be rebranded the Graduate Faculty of Political and Social Science, the graduate faculty. And when joined with the New School for Social Research, it was shortened to the New School, today reduced to New University. The New School for Social Research would combine with Frankfurt intellectuals, and today it has grown to include multiple universities and gained a major influence in shaping Western intellectual thought. So, yep, that is for sure. It spreads from Columbia University. I mean, this is where the Teachers College was. Columbia University is really like AP or routers. Everything flows through them to the rest of the distributors. And so in this case, it goes to the rest of the Association of American Universities, to the entire network. This Marxist ideas of anti-American permeates through. And this is why we have little Marxists coming out of universities for the last 50 years. So we see this here in the 60s, and the 60s counterculture was really started here by the father of the New Left, Herbert Marcuse, who used critical theory on a massive scale. He's also a Frankfurt School descendant, with help of activists Abby Hoffman and Angela Davis. Those names should be familiar to you. Those are two of the lead figures in the 60s counterculture, the anti-establishment fight when the Vietnam War was around. Okay. But Marcuse worked at Brandeis University and trained both Hoffman and Davis at Brandeis. Kurt Levine, a modern pioneer in social organization and applied science, considered the founder of social psychology, Erich Fromm, was influenced into Zionism by Nehemiah Anton Noble. But Fromm, another massive figure in early to mid 20th century postmodernist philosophy. And Kurt Levine is considered a, huge name in psychology here in the West. These are some of the guys that Rockefeller brought over. Okay, father of the new left, Herbert Marcuse. Here's Levine. And here's our buddy Huxley. So into the political salons in California. Okay, these are highly influential. This is where you don't have to be sort of restrained by political protocol or being proper. This is where, much like in the Century Club, really foreign policy, domestic policy is created out of political salons, these little private get-togethers. So either in an individual's home, or in this case now, we see the gentlemen's clubs like the Century Club, the Council on Foreign Relations, these 501 not-for-profit think tanks. This is really where policy is established. And if you don't believe me, ask Hillary Clinton. Okay, so Horkheimer attempted to associate with the University of California, but couldn't make it happen. That's where Marcuse ends up anyways later. So this is, the political salons become a viable alternative to gaining some influence. So Santa Monica, or for that matter, Los Angeles in its entirety, was considered a suburb of Hollywood. And here's Huxley's home with the Hollywood sign right behind it. Still property of the Huxleys today. And they have often readings and get-togethers there in celebration of the giant grasshopper, or as he was affectionately known in high school, the ogre. So I've never met more nasties than Huxleyites. So I would imagine that I'm going to get a little bit more of that after this. What they don't understand is that Huxley is really an architect, not a prognosticator. Okay, so they're adopting a dialectical view of Los Angeles as a paradise in order to perceive it as the cityscape of modernism, Bertolt Brecht, stating in his Refugee Conversations that, quote, emigration is the best school of dialectics, end quote. Bertolt Brecht, picture him here. Okay, and here's an image, an official image distribution of foreign-born from Austria, Germany, Hungary, US Census data, 1940. So Austria, Germany, Hungary, at the end of the decade, after they'd all come over, we can see that there's a huge concentration of them here in Los Angeles, and especially in Pacific Palisades, in the hills to the west of Los Angeles. So I'm going to take a second here and show you something. If I can get it. Show you exactly where we're talking. Okay, so to the upper right here, Mulholland, 6233 Mulholland Highway is where Aldous Huxley lived. He lived in a couple different places. This is one I think is the one that burnt down, but you can see that if he just drove in his car, he's going to hit Santa Monica Boulevard, head down this way, past the Rainbow Room. and through Pacific Palisades, Laurel Canyon's in here. And this is just 4 or 5 of the numbers or the addresses that I've located. I've got another picture with many, many more, but I just wanted to show you that there's Rand Corporation right by Santa Monica Pier, Salka Vertel's political salon, and then Thomas Mann's political salon. And then the Villa Aurora is here in the Pacific Palisades. So you can see that they're actually, and when I have the entirety of them in here, there is at least a dozen right in here. So we're going to get into this, and as we go on, I kind of wanted to do it from this place and go back into history, because all of these guys are hanging out with Aldous Huxley in the south of France, Sanary-sur-Mer, in a tiny little town, when he writes A Brave New World. And then they all come to LA together. One of the more amazing stories. And so that's the area right there. So back to Exhilarator, the census picture. Okay, so here's the Villa Aurora. The guy that was at the top of the car, the jalopy there that Huxley was driving, that was Leon Feuchtwanger. This is his house. The Villa Aurora was the only one in that area when he bought it for $9,000 from a bankruptcy. It was a house of the future. It had dishwashers and automated garage door openers, all of those kinds of things. And it was the first in the Pacific Palisades. So one of the frequent guests at their political salon was, in fact, Aldous Huxley. Huxley just living a few minutes drive above them in the Hollywood Hills. This showing a wide influence of Huxley. Not only was he a prominent figure in the intellectual philosophical circles, but the seminal inspiration for the creation of Esalen and the human potential movement. We're going to get into this. So the doors, taking their name from Huxley's forever life-changing Doors of Perception, were largely responsible for inspiring, at the very least. He was a consultant, however. U.S. Army Major General Albert Stubblebine III goes one step further in one of his final interviews before his death, admitting to researcher Jan Irvin that Huxley was, in fact, the director of MKUltra. This may speak to why Sidney Gottlieb's is the only name not redacted from the MKUltra papers that were released. As a red herring, communications between Huxley and MKUltra doctors well known and documented in several letters, Huxley even trusting one of them, Humphrey Osmond, to administer Huxley's first hit of mescaline. We're going to get into all of that. Who administered LSD first to Huxley, and then who administered, same guy, administered LSD to Huxley on the day that he died, November 22nd, 1963, same day as JFK. Okay, so he's really a large founder of the New Age, Huxley. So this speaks to a comprehensive kind of influence Huxley wielded while living in the hills directly underneath the Hollywood sign, looking down on the city. He was deeply influencing on all levels, but most importantly, spiritually and psychologically. Again, we see a demoralization program being instituted, and Huxley has his hands on the steering wheel. The New Age used as a weapon, just as they would employ critical theory or the entering wedge. Now, the New Age was founded by a hypnotist, and when you go back and you chase that to source, you quickly see that that is a real messed up form of propaganda. So here's the Thomas Mann home. It today is completely connected with the Villa Aurora, which we will get into. That is what a political salon in Los Angeles looks like. So this is a documented historical account agreed upon by any historian well-versed on the subject, it being widely accepted that it was these people of the Weimar Hitler had identified as infiltrators of traditional German culture through and aimed to remove through the law for the restoration of the civil service. These same people Hitler identified as city slacker literati, Asphalt Literaten, while proclaiming the end of overblown Jewish intellectualism. Hitler's famous for saying international clique were welcomed with open arms in the United States and against better judgment put into incredibly sensitive areas of U.S. intelligence, including the OSS and the Office for Wartime Information and the Psychological Division. This is Marcuse's in there. They let these guys in there. Norbert Wiener too. So there are no statistics available for artists in other fields, but it is safe to call this one of the largest emigrations of writers and artists recorded in history. That's Erhard Bahr, Weimar on the Pacific, page 14. And so this is why I say this is like a Operation Paperclip, just, artists instead of rocket scientists. And that quote comes from this book, which I own. Okay, so that is the end of that. And maybe I'll take a moment here to show you guys some of the provenance, some of the books that I'm using. Because in that Changing Images of Man book, they cite Aldous Huxley and Julian a dozen times, and B.F. Skinner, the behaviorists. So I've got books that are, 1930 on Huxley, Every Man's Library. I've got an incredible Aldous Huxley and film, which Virginia M. Clark was able to interview Huxley's wife and son and go through the paperwork, go through his papers, and tells an incredible story of Huxley in Hollywood that I'm not sure anybody would find. I paid $40 for this. Had to have it. Something like that. Here's me and my band days. Here. This guy. Calcaberry Pie. I just found that when I was going through my books. I hadn't seen that in a long time. So B.F. Skinner, Beyond Freedom. We get into cybernetics, Macy Conferences, and one of the founders of it all is W. Ross Ashby. About behaviorism, B.F. Skinner. And then one of his best-known books, Science and Human Behavior, B.F. Skinner. (1953). Okay, and then for Huxley, I've got this. There's 6 volumes of his complete essays. $300 for all 6. So it's not like we're suffering from a lack of citations, provenance, right? It's not like we need Wiki to tell us stories. I've got Aldous Huxley writing "Do What You Will," sounding a lot like Aleister Crowley, and we're going to make this connection because Timothy Leary claims to be the next Aleister Crowley. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Aldous Huxley hanging out in Berlin with Christopher Isherwood. And I'm about 99.9% sure Aleister Crowley at the fall of Berlin, at the end of the Weimar culture. Brave New World Revisited. (1958). This has been a great help. Huxley in Hollywood. See that? David King Dunaway. I don't even think you can get that on the internet. I had to get it in actual form. Huxley in Hollywood. And then we get into cybernetics, Macy Conferences. This is the book on cybernetics and the Macy Conferences from 46 to 1953 by Klaus Piess. See how thick that is? Kid you not, I've gone through a lot of that. Okay, so I've done all that to afford me a worldview that's sophisticated well beyond the majority. Okay, as you're starting to see in my work, this is how it's done. This is how we had to figure out what and how the methods that they were controlling us. Okay, so we've gotten through the first one, the exiliterator. Gotten through all the initial paperwork. We're probably at about an hour. I feel good, so I'm going to keep going here now. This critical moment. There's 2 more stories to tell that I've written, Hidden in the Shadow of the Sun and How Huxley Hijacked Hollywood. But first, I want to introduce you to the MKUltra reunion tape that was recorded of all these guys together at a political salon of Oscar Janiger's years after this happened, in which it's pretty candid as to who was controlling, who was the inspiration, who were the influences and the roles that these guys all played and the mistakes they made. So let me see if I can find that. Right there. Okay. This will be cool. You guys are going to enjoy this. I actually sped it up to 1.25, and it's so much easier to understand. And next with the Jan Irvin one, this one right here, because I've done this with my buddy Andy Gerard at Go Within to Get Out, but I don't think we did a very good job, and I think that Jan Irvin does a spectacular job here. So this is one of the researchers that had inspired me many years ago, but he's kind of just fallen off the face of the earth, and I've continued his work. So I'm going to just make this full size, and you can see that in his intro, he's got Aldous Huxley front and center, the Central Intelligence Agencies, I think that's of Britain, and the Fabian Society, saying much the same thing we are today. So see if I can get this going. And actually, let me just make sure that the volume is there. Yes, it is. Okay.
Which is Nancy Irvin.
Certainly down the fire.
I did nothing.
I know he's got that. You never did know that kind of that.
That's my second
They put 20 years on it. I was one that received for you.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is wild. We got Timothy Leary on the right, sitting on a couch, and to the left, we've got Al Hubbard, and that is Johnny Appleseed of LSD. He's a key figure in distributing LSD basically around the world. This guy was like a triple agent and worked out of Vancouver. And I've gone to look at one of the buildings that he was working out of. I've got that documented in my file system, but he was OSS, Stanford Research Institute, Department of Justice. So you can see he's cross-pollinated. Timothy Leary, we know him from the Millbrook Mansion in the 60s, Esalen Institute, and his involvement with the CIA out of Harvard. This is all documented fact, admitted. Okay, so these are the characters, the first 2 characters. Basically, the conversation sort of centers around these 2 and Oscar Janiger, who's just over here on the couch too. But the camera angle doesn't change, and the the director, Willis Harman, of the Changing Images of Man study is here. So this is a key connection, that he is also MKUltra and into these various ways of social engineering through this form of society, or this is one of the 7 forms or aspects of society that they're going into.
Well, thank you, Al. Thank you.
Very serious about it. I thought that was... I liked it, yeah. Well, what did you do for him? Entertained a box of marijuana, snuff box for it. Give him 30 years for it. Yeah. That's good. Early well. Anyway, I hope to be able to do something. You were acting in his behalf.
Okay, so Oscar Janiger is sitting there on the left with the white sleeves. He's going to eventually stand up and come over here and sit on Timothy Leary's left. This guy with the glasses, his name is Bill. I'm not sure entirely who he is, but he does make some incredible comments.
I'm still out of time. So listen, don't give up. The case, the king's still alive, you know.
That'll be something.
I need you now more than ever.
Hey, when did
right when I learned the parole board.
Listen, when did you 2 guys meet? Oh, 20, 30 years ago. That was 20 years ago.
That was about 1960. 61. When he went to Harvard. Back at Harvard, 1960.
There's Stolaroff, and then on the right here is Humphrey Osmond. He's a stutterer. Sounds like Elmer Fudd.
You can't high or can't low. I gave him like 100, a tablet of 500, a bottle of 500 tablets.
Okay, so Humphrey Osmond, MKUltra doctor, Timothy Leary, 60s counterculture guru, and admitted next generation Crowleyan. He says that he's the next Aleister Crowley. Can show you that. Johnny Appleseed, one of the major hubs of distribution. Stolaroff over here. Janiger, one of the Macy Conferences, one of those books that I just showed you. He's there. Him and Sidney Cohen, who's about to make an appearance. Okay, so there's Sidney Cohen. Sits down.
Did you introduce Tim to CO2?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He dragged us all around Boston with his...
Okay, so everybody know everybody? We're going to go to 7:30. See, hopefully this doesn't really mess me up. Little bars in my way again.
Bill Harmon says there's a nice way to do it. I don't know what the nice way is.
So he's right here is where Al Hubbard is talking about the ways in which they did it, and he bashed people over the head with a baseball bat. Well, he says that Willis Harman thought that there was a nicer way to do it. So Willis Harman is sitting over here being a total wallflower on the left. We're going to get a glimpse of him just quick.
Bill Harmon says there's a nice way to do it. I don't know what the nice way is.
Willis Harman,
Bill?
head of the Stanford Research Institute Changing Images of Man study.
It's your fault, I'll be with you.
And I think he says it's your fault or something.
Well,
and everybody laughs.
We just remember the first time we met, which is in Cambridge, in 19 on the night of Kennedy election.
And now this stuttering Elmer Fudd is going to explain the night that Aldous Huxley, Timothy Leary, and him all met at Cambridge the night of the Kennedy election, which is kind of strange because Huxley dies the same day as Kennedy. While his nurses are huddled around the television watching the Kennedy assassination, he passes off into the nether regions.
1960. In 1960, we went out to this place, and Timothy then was wearing his grey flannel suit
with his crew cut, and we had this very interesting discussion with him. And when we went, I don't think I ever told you this, Timothy, but when we went away, we both said what a nice fellow he is. And he said he's a very nice man, and Aldous said it's very, very nice to think this work's going to be done at Harvard. He said it'd be so good for it. And then I said to Aldous, I said, I think he's a very nice fellow too, but don't you think that he's just a little bit square? And Aldous said, you may well be right. He said, but after all, isn't that what we want? Timothy, when I'm discussing the need for understanding human temperament, this is the story I tell, because I said, here Aldous and I are deeply interested in the nature of human temperament, and we meet someone who I think that was probably the least satisfactory description of you ever made, Timothy. I think even your greatest enemies would never make that description. And we made it. And we were very, very concerned because we felt that you were perhaps a bit too unadventurous. You'll see what insight we had.
Well, you sure think contributed your part. But
I've always considered myself very square.
Yeah. So we were right in a way.
Okay, so you can see Huxley's talking about Humphrey Osmond talks about the moment that Leary met Aldous Huxley, and Huxley and Osmond figured that Leary was a little square, and they say that was one of the largest. What do they say? One of his largest mistakes of judges of character, or something along those ways, because the last thing Timothy Leary is square. He's actually been hired to fill his role, as he will say, to get out beyond and out into the sort of the crazy areas to give these clinicians reasonable ground to work on. This is what they discuss. So Humphrey Osmond, he says that whenever he's discussing the need for understanding human temperament, so this is the giant program that they're on. The need to understand human temperament. And when you look at the origins of the Macy Conferences, that is exactly what they're doing. Hypnotism is the first meeting that they have. So Sidney Cohen, he's the chief of psychosomatic medicine. Guy on the left with the silver hair that sat down. Cohen and Huxley worked directly together at the VA hospital, Wadsworth, Los Angeles. Cohen first administered LSD to Huxley and on his deathbed. So it's the guy that just sat down, the silver hair on the left, that administered LSD to Huxley for the first and last time.
I always try to hang around the hippest person in the area and continue to do that. Because I really basically feel I'm square, and I have very little sense of own paths. You yours, me mine, he his.
Okay, so there's Sidney Cohen talking about the different roles that they played.
We each seem to have followed our own paths. You yours, me mine, he his.
Fortunately, since they didn't go in the same direction, a great deal of ground was covered.
Yeah, I guess one of the things Oscar might be interested in is what does it all mean and how is it all going to work out and all that sort of thing. And I wonder whether, I know I couldn't possibly evaluate. Anybody want to try?
Nice, I was really interested in your opinion.
Well, I think, as you heard, it stirred people up. It cracked their frame of reference by the thousands, millions perhaps. And anything that does that is pretty good, I think. Anything that shakes people up a little.
He's talking about LSD.
Some people maybe it shook up a little too much. That was unfortunate. But in the totality, it may have been a desirable thing at that point in time. The next question would be, well, what's going to happen? And there, I think, we will see, not soon, but in X number of years, a recrudescence of similar usage here, there, and everywhere. It's happened throughout history, hasn't it?
Yes. So don't you think that the other very important thing is the actual time this has happened to begin with? As you point out, it's very good for people to be shaken up a certain amount. So far, on the whole, our ways of shaking ourselves up have usually to have real cataclysms. I mean, for instance, the Iranians are being shaken up at the moment. It would appear that many of them might prefer not to be in this kind of way, because the difficulty with having the great cataclysms is that you end up worse than you began. If one could be able to have a sort of controlled cataclysm from time to time, we'd be much better off, because every society gets set in its ways, and a society with a vast technology is...
Controlled cataclysms.
always likely to get to the point when it's simpler and easier and comfier to let the technology take over. And one of the things that seems to me that these substances and the attitudes they generate very well is that one becomes less willing to do that because it's not necessary. You don't have to look upon your technology as your idol. And it's easy to do this, and it's particularly easy to do this if you've got no way out. It's easy if you're able sort of to separate yourself.
So you think that in days to come, as we become more constricted and more homogenized, that it may be even more necessary to have such...
Much more necessary. But I think it's still very, very necessary because we are so clever at building all these strange and remarkable things. But then the thing that we stop being clever is that we're very liable then to make ourselves in our own image. I mean, it's extremely interesting, the image of the things we've made, rather. It's very interesting that the mind described by Thomas Willis in 1670 was of a kind of mirror. And the reason why he described that, the mirror was an extremely fashionable new invention. Then the mind that Freud described, if you remember, was a magic lantern. That's where projection comes from. I mean, this was the latest thing. Now the mind
was an indoor plumbing system.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Then the mind became a telephone exchange. Then I gather
ready for that one.
Then it became a kind of television thing. And I gather the latest thing to say it's a hologram. Now the only thing that we know is it's none of those things. The fact is that we've invented all those things, and it's apparently a thing we always do. Now, as long as we don't take it too seriously, but it seems to me one of the things...
You mentioned hologram.
Substances and the techniques you learn from them is they help you not to take it seriously. Now,
from a mirror to a lantern to a hologram.
With the other people, that none of them have ever managed to make, it seems to me, such an intrusive technology as we've made. It's always been much more difficult. Our technology is sort of marvelously able to do things which would have only tyrants could have done otherwise. Only tyrants could produce vast entertainments for themselves. We get vast entertainments for ourselves whether we want it or not. And it's, therefore we need to have ways of dealing with it. I think Aldous was completely right in both his moralities, in Brave New World and in Ireland, that our needs now are very great. And since it doesn't seem to me that we're likely to distechnicalize ourselves, because even if we wanted to do that, if we were able to do this, I don't think we can, but suppose we were, no one else is going to do this. So the result of our sort of removing ourselves from the pastoral life would be that someone would come over and take over the continent. They'd be bound to. But it would be too much of a temptation for anyone with a technology in being to see us like say the Americas in 1492.
Oh yeah. Listen, but can I interrupt just one second? You mentioned in the names. Has it been done yet? I think we should say hello to Aldous Huxley.
Yes.
And to Gerald Hurd.
Yes, we should.
And Alan Watts. And to Alan Watts, who was the most underestimated of all the philosophers of our time, and they're here with us. And to say hello to Art Chandler, by the way. All right. Hello, Art. Remember Art? It's been going back a long way. Right? Yeah. And those of us in those days, I don't know that we...
Oh, Willis Harmon is sitting right here. There's a better picture of him later.
Fancied what we were heading into.
Right
Maybe
there,
we might have
sitting up against the wall.
Halt then at the time, but somehow, you know, we were really getting into some things that, from different directions, everybody was finding their own way. I'd like to say, does anyone here feel that mistakes were made? Or,
no.
What mistakes were made?
Well, Timothy, estimations in retrospect are in principle unfair. It's really like the chaps, you know, who, when the generals of World War II have large numbers of fellows who were not born at that time, who write interestingly accounts of how the Battle of the Bulge might have been better fought. It's only too
that's
easy.
Wonderful.
It's only too easy.
Everyone's going to write their own cosmology.
But I mean, I think that
the world was made in 7 days, but where and when?
Yeah, but I think that those sort of things, one could. I don't have to say mistakes. What I say, you could have seen other ways of doing it.
My God, quantum physics now tells us that in any second can go in how many different ways?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's one of the lessons.
There was a mistake made. Nobody gave it to Nixon.
There was a mistake made and nobody gave it to Nixon. This is a couple times they mentioned this.
And if you can define a goal, I can tell you whether mistakes were made. I think mistakes were made. But that's my own personal goal.
Well, I'll say one of the goals was to make the American people smarter, raise their intelligence. And I think the American people today are quantum jumps more sophisticated in exactly the general direction in which we all hope they would become more sophisticated, about consciousness, about the nervous system, about the brain, about the options people have in creating their own reality, about self-actualization, self-indulgence, about pleasure being a self-reward as opposed to high reward. My God. Pleasure is now the #1 industry in this country. Recreational travel, entertainment, sensory indulgence. Oh my God, so now, no question about they're #1. Now, that was my goal.
So there's an extraordinary admission there that was his goal. So to 2255, save ourselves a little bit of time. So this is a story that Stolaroff talks about, and this is probably the most famous quote of all, but we've already seen them mention Aldous Huxley at least 3 times as a major contributor to all of this. And it gets even more incriminating for the giant grasshopper.
Yes, in this case, you certainly made advance foot. However, let me put the slightly contrary point of view. We have the awkward thing that we now have chaps like the Ayatollah Khomeini appearing on the scene who have the potential of rather different goals. And certainly from where I've been, which you know very well, in the South, these other different goals are always potential.
All right, Pakistan is now going backwards. We're going to cut off hands for the first robbery.
Not sure what happened. Let me try it again. Wow.
I don't know whether I was right now, come to think of it.
Well, Tim, you and I had an agreement once, too. The last time I saw you. We have our differences of view. And
there's Harmon. There's a real great shot of him. You can easily see that is Willis Harmon, the head of the Changing Images of Man study, sitting there, not saying much.
And we were a little disturbed that some of the things you were doing and planning would make it more difficult. In fact, even at the time I saw you, it was making it more difficult to carry on legitimate research. And we agreed, if you remember, that, well, Myron, you stay in there and you do the legitimate research, but you need somebody to kind of shake them up a bit. And so I'll shake them up, and then you can take them and show them where they can learn what the right path is. But I didn't know that when you're going to shake them up, you're going to hit them on the head with a ball bat.
Well, I know I said that. I have had this experience 4 times in the last 15 years.
That was a silencer.
20 years. I was one of the
Timothy Leary, the man that's never short for words, was speechless there.
Very long, narrow plank, too, look around. And in their way, I think brought back some very good things,
Okay, Los Angeles is a laboratory.
I think, it's an interesting thing, too. As you go around the country, I'm sure you all have this experience, you talk to middle-aged, fairly respectable people in Tucson, Arizona, and they said, this is where the acid thing really happens. Tucson. In San Francisco, this is where it really happened. The Lower East Side, they say that's where it really happened. And no one has ever really told us what was going on in Los Angeles during those years. I think much more was done down here. There was a much wider range. There were more doctors involved. There were more scientists involved.
We had Gerald and Aldous.
Yes, that's right, yeah. And
with a reference to Aldous.
Then, of course, it was part of the coolness of the Los Angeles cell, whatever you want to call it, that they kept you kept a...
Well, you might not call it a cell. Let's call it a cluster.
Did you see Sidney Cohen get triggered there when Timothy Leary used the word cell? This is a direct reference to their CIA involvement. Sidney Cohen says, would you mind not calling it a cell? How about a cluster?
Our undercover agents in Los Angeles were very cool about, and yet they did more in a very laid-back way. And it's never been as public as some of the other, the buses running around the country.
Yeah, and then Zimberg says that the visionary experience and all the things he was doing at Harvard and the others, his residents and the rest of it he was giving LSD to, they never had a visionary or an ecstatic or mystic experience, but the whole thing was a California invention. He said, and the only time it ever happened was when you crossed the Colorado River.
I'm reading John Mark's
okay.
book on the Manchurian search for the Manchurian candidate, in which he says that The CIA turned us all on, you know.
Well, that was
but
Kemp's idea, too, wasn't it?
I'd like to get your opinion of what started it. Was it Aldous Huxley's dose of perception? Was it Tim Leary? What made the mass use of psychedelics come on, would you say?
Well, notice we have to mention the name of Ken Kesey, and of course Allen Ginsberg was an indefatigable Zionist politician for drugs, and
Okay, so Ken Kesey is the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Ken Kesey is one of the major distributors of LSD. He was driving the bus, literally. The merry pranksters were running around the country. I think they mainly stayed in the West, but Ken Kesey is the man for LSD distribution. He was going to the hospital, much like Al Hubbard, and getting huge quantities of LSD and then distributing it through their, what'd they call those? They would have nights where everybody dropped acid. And they did them several times. This is what the whole journey was about. So we're seeing also a reference to Allen Ginsberg, indefatigable Zionist, is what Leary called him. And this is a direct connection now to the beat writers in the 50s. So you can see that there's an evolution from the beat writers of the 50s to the 60s counterculture. Allen Ginsberg mentioned. And there's CIA there too.
But at the very beginning, what would you say? What turned you on him? I don't remember.
And Gordon Watson. Don't ever underestimate the effect of that wonderful, respectable, far-out mind. Yes. In Life magazine, there is a banker, Morgan.
Okay. So he just mentioned Gordon Wasson. We're going to digress here for a sec because it's amazing. Gordon Wasson was the head of propaganda for J.P. Morgan. And he's the one that the CIA paid to go down to Mexico to find the magic mushroom from which they derived LSD. So I'm just going to see if I can find this because I've got the Life magazine story he's talking about, which it shows Gordon Wasson there. High on mushrooms. Another few seconds. This is a famous Life magazine article. This is the cover, May 13th, 1957. So this is actually the actor that played the lion in Wizard of Oz. Many confuse him with Gordon Wasson, but that's not what Gordon Wasson looks like. That's just the cover. So inside that article is, or inside that magazine is the article seeking the magic mushroom. New York banker goes to Mexico's mountains to participate in the age-old rituals of Indians who choose strange growths that produce visions. This is the founding of the LSD movement into America, the permeation of LSD culture into the United States by Gordon Wasson, the author of this article, a vice president of J.P. Morgan and Co. Incorporated. He's actually the head of propaganda. Public relations is what he is. Okay, and here he is. Author Wasson sits in New York home with recorder, mushroom pictures, and mushroom stone. A one-time newspaper man, he took up banking in 1928. And here he is with Carindera Eva Mendez. This is who he takes mushrooms with. And there he is taking them. Okay. Probably high as a kite right there. Certainly looks like it. Really looks like a man on mushrooms. And then we see some pictures of while they were on it, they were having visions. This is what these people would do, and this is where the story came from. And so J.P. Morgan caught wind of all of this and sent Gordon Wasson to go find it, and he was successful. So while they were there, they drew all kinds of pictures. Rare vision-giving fungi shown for the first time. There's where they were all hanging out. So it's all actually documented. This is true story. Gordon Wasson hooked up to something there. And there he is with a whole bunch of them, going through them, weighing them. J.P. Morgan, right? He writes a book called Soma. Okay, amazing, amazing historical artifact. So as he mentions that, we have to go there. Okay, so, oops. I think we can just do this, can we? Oh, no. Because Timothy Leary mentions him, it's important. Okay, so back to the MKUltra. And we're going to go to 3915. Roughly. And this is where they discuss the big explosion of LSD and what it was that really pushed it over the edge.
Claims and so on, but I think you're referring to the big explosion of the
big explosion was when it came out on the cover story on all the popular magazines, Life, Saturday Evening Post, the whole business that were back. They were all.
Well, Aldous' book, Joys of Perception, Heaven and Hell, were extremely important among intellectuals. Yes. And Frank Barron was another person who was very active in the psych.
Okay, so when he says intellectuals, this is how they roll. They're using all this Huxley's Heaven and Hell and Doors of Perception to influence not only this the masses, but the intellectual scholarly function of society.
Psychology.
Of course, it was Albert Hoffman who did it all anyway.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. Your question, I think, really is directed at where did the young people get it? Because that's where the movement started that really spread it across the country.
What do you think about Robert DeRock? That had a lot of effect where I was. In fact, I was very surprised when I saw
he handled the Mendocino County chapter.
But didn't that Drugs in the Mind have a lot of effect on campuses and stuff like that?
It did. But it was more than just a book or two. There was something in the wind, and I really...
Something in the wind.
Major burst of publicity is out here trying to focus on. Was that the...
Well, there were steps all the way.
Yeah.
Huxley was one of the first.
After we were fired from Harvard, that fall, every major magazine came out with a... There was a cover story in Saturday Evening Post. Dangerous. There were three different stories in Playboy. So that was, it was the firing from Harvard, plus the fact that Henry Luce was somewhere always behind the scenes doing certain things.
Okay, so Timothy Leary was famously fired from Harvard because they were giving test scores and smoking weed and whatever with students. And this is the alleged story, but it became a national story. And from that came all of these national magazines explaining it all and also looking at it from a point of how dangerous this can be for culture. So it completely appealed to the youth. And he says here in a moment that that's exactly who they target, the prepubescent adolescent.
Plus, so many people have been involved in Los Angeles and so forth. But that was the first big one.
Tim was more responsible than anybody before that.
Wasn't it the calculated goal of IFF to cause that kind of spreading?
Yeah. I remember coming to Cambridge one time when a little article in Time came out.
Yeah.
Remember? Yeah. And I walked in there and he said, "What do you think about the Time article?" It was really devastatingly bad for LSD. I thought it was terrible, I said. Tim said, "We thought it was great. You let you let the kids know that there's something here, they'll know it, you know. It doesn't make a difference whether it's bad, good, or indifferent.
Well, I want to point out, though, that the picture, we all know here and now study pictures more than they do long columns. The particular picture, this article in Time magazine attacking our research, had a scientific instrument called the experiential typewriter, with all these, that was actually filled with socks, but that's all right. It had an incredibly beautiful young woman sitting, taking the test, and it had standing behind her Alan Watts, a beautiful female Hindu guru named Gayatri Devi, and myself. Now the signal content of a picture like that was much more important than the little words that were being written by some clerk at Time magazine in the medical department. How about McLuhan?
Marshall McLuhan gets mentioned.
That what else
Media
could
is
happen
the
in a
message.
person's life, that short from a religious conversion, that can fire them up with the sort of zeal that we saw in the few people that we began to use it with. In other words, perhaps not everybody went out.
Psychosis.
Yeah, but it was a contagion. It was certainly a contagion.
Contagious psychosis.
It was a contagion. It was a chance. It was a chance.
They're seriously shaking hands because what they created was a contagious psychosis.
For everyone to go to the carnival all at once, you know? Okay. And they all
An opportunity for everybody to go to the carnival all at once.
came out of that place and they were ready to really spread the word. I'll tell you.
This really fueled the 60s counterculture.
They had the sacrament, and that's
It
how
was
they
being
behaved
steered and
in those
directed
days.
by Herbert
Now,
Marcuse,
that's a
the
pretty
new left.
irresistible force in terms of public diffusion.
Through his
of
teachings of Angela Davis and
that was
Abby
the
Hoffman
kind of
at
zeal that
Brandeis
we
University.
experienced.
There's people in this room right now, if we decided to do anything in the next 6 months, that was really right. You know, it was right. It had to be, you know, we could do it.
I'm not so sure. You know, it's amazing how many times the same mistakes are repeated. When I first came to Los Angeles, I was working with Murray Jarvik, who's over here, and we were setting up some LSD studies to do it, and with marijuana and a few other drugs. And Allen Ginsberg came by the lab to visit me one day. Showed Allen around, and as he was leaving the lab, one of the administrators in the building, it's over UCLA, saw him and allegedly saw someone smoking a joint in his entourage. On the basis of that, there was a big flap. And it was like another Harvard psilocybin fiasco on a much smaller scale. There was absolutely no truth to any of the charges or anything, but you know, it was an uncomfortable situation, anyone wanting to do research with these drugs, even though there was authorization, there was all the DEA forms, there was all the necessary precautions that were taken according to law. There's a lot of resistance to doing those things. And I've encountered that again and again in every university I've gone to trying to set up these studies. And it takes a year and a half of paper. I think Murray took us a year and a half of paperwork.
I think we're in the dark ages.
To get our proposal approved finally.
Drug research of that type.
And the one thing that kept on coming down, they didn't mind marijuana. We were given marijuana, had 11 hallucinogens listed on the proposal. And the only one that the proposal kept on coming back for was LSD. They said, oh, you're going to use LSD, you got to do a follow-up. You got to do a 90-day follow-up, you got to do a year-and-a-half follow-up.
30-year follow-up.
They didn't care about the mescaline, they didn't care about the psilocybin, they didn't care about ketamine, which we can give to children. And it's the only drug that we can give to children without any formal, any hallucinogen that we can give to children without any formal studies.
Why is that? Why? First person to publish in an American journal on LSD? I guess so.
Here they talk about the Macy
some of the Macy
Conferences.
Foundation conferences, you remember. You were there, I think.
Yeah. And I said, how did you get...
Okay, so there is Sidney Cohen admitting that he was at the Macy Conferences and pointing at Oscar Janiger and saying, you were there, and you can hear Oscar Janiger saying, yep. So they were there at the very beginnings, even before it's Macy, MKUltra. The Macy Conferences are the foundation of all of it. It's a precursor.
Onto it. He said, I don't know, we got the idea that if we had a good delirium going, he said, we may shake things up a bit, you know. He said, and Johnson and
delirium.
I said, where did you get it? 1940, 50. He said, oh, we just sent his hand. Amazing.
Guys, so I hope you're getting something out of that. There's several admissions of Huxley's importance in all of it. And now we're going to move on to a Stubblebine interview from Jan Irvin here, in which he asks Stubblebine whether Huxley was the head of MKUltra, and you'll see for yourself here that he basically agrees.
I had discovered that it looked very obvious that Aldous Huxley was one of the key people, if not the head of MKUltra, directing the studies, et cetera, to be done. You agree with that statement as the former head of Army Intel. And can you give any information on what Aldous Huxley's position was?
I don't think I should.
Yeah. Okay, so we can debate on whether Huxley was the head of MKUltra, which I do think, when you look at all the information, for sure he was. At least he was in a tight circle. And so General Stubblebine, he's also the guy that was in charge of Men Who Stare at Goats, the movie. It's this book by John Ronson. It goes deep into all of the psychological aspects of the mythical, magical, and mystical, trying to pass through walls. Okay, and then a lot of the information also can be found in this, the official CIA Manual of Trickery and Deception, declassified. H. Keith Melton goes through all 58. Think of the MKUltra sub whatever they're called. There's 58 aspects to the MKUltra movement, or the MKUltra operation. And this 58, be that easy to just find? Maybe. You can have a table of contents, so who knows? But that is one of the sources, okay? So that's Stubblebine admitting that Huxley's at least there, and he's one of the key guys. And when asked to define that exactly and precisely, he decides not to, which probably means that he was the head. Now, this makes sense because Huxley's in LA. And Tavistock leads to the Macy Conferences that lead to MKUltra. This is a largely Fabian society driven, slow march. Okay, and so we're going to leave it there. We're going to finish the other two articles in a part 2 of this series, okay? But I want to leave you with some positivity. Maybe I'll just bring it up on the screen. From a brave new world forward. Much like we see in the protocols where they say that the individual initiative can do more than 1 million. We also see Huxley admitting their greatest fear is a move to decentralization. Okay, so this is Brave New World. Page 15 of the introduction, where Huxley states himself, only a large-scale popular movement toward decentralization and self-help can arrest the present tendency toward statism, that being globalism, internationalism. At present, there is no sign that such a movement will take place. Now, that was in 1930, pretty close to 100 years ago. And they never saw either me or us coming. We were too far ahead in the future. Now, what we've done here is really uncover their entire plan, showing that it's systems-based, and this is, as we're going to show you through the rest of our investigation, this goes all the way back to the Enlightenment, the Illuminati, the origins of social sciences, and our modern conundrum. So I appreciate you being here. We're going to go to part 2 here soon. But I hope you got a lot out of that, because that MKUltra reunion tape, the Albert Stubblebine interview, all of these admissions from the MKUltra doctors of how influential Aldous Huxley was are all the reasons why I believe that Aldous Huxley was really behind it all. We're going to further substantiate that into an area where you cannot argue in the next show. And that will be on how Huxley hijacked Hollywood. So until then, thank you for being here. Talk to you later.